Hello and welcome. My name is Mitch Warner. This is Jim Ferrell. We're managing partners here at Arbinger, and so excited that you choose to spend this time with us here today to talk about the outward mindset in anticipation of the release of the new second edition of the book that came out first in 2016. We're really excited about this release and want to spend some time together today to talk about why a new edition, what's new in the book, what have we been learning since the first edition came out that we think you'll find really interesting today. As we go through the course of this presentation, would love to have you be asking questions along the way. If you want to ask a question, just ask it there in the chat bar, and if we have time, we'll try to get to as many of those as we can here at the end of the session today. We're going to be looking at, in addition to some of the things that we've learned with our clients, we want to be looking too at some of the research that underpins our work and what's been happening in the field of research around mindset since the book first came out, and what we've included about that in the book, as well as some assessments you can begin to take here right now to explore mindset more deeply, and some of the deeper underpinnings of the work that we've highlighted in the book in this second edition. So with that, Jim, you want to dive in?
Thank you, Mitch. It's great to be with all of you. Thanks for devoting this time. We want to bring, both Mitch and I want to bring a lot of value to you today. And so I want to start by introducing something that's actually new in this edition. We've added a chapter on what you might think of as an assumption that we're all making. It's part of the cultural air that we're breathing that's actually mistaken. And to dive into that a little bit by way of introduction today, what that assumption is, think about this. There was a very important thinker hundreds of years ago. His name was René Descartes. And Descartes is known as the father of modern philosophy. And he built an entire philosophical work that started on a single sentence. And it's an incredible work. And it's amazing that if you were to poll everyone in this world, I'm going to guess about 50% of the people would be able to say his first sentence. So if you come up with any work, Mitch, that like 400 years from now, people know your sentence that you start from, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Not bad. And that sentence, of course, is, I think, therefore I am. Now, inside that sentence is an assumption. And in philosophy, the whole ballgame is in the assumptions. Where do you start from? Because then you apply rules of logic to wherever you started from. Well, if you think about that statement, I think, therefore I am. There are two words. The word I is repeated in that statement. It's about me. It's about a separate self. And with that sentence, the West uptook this assumption of an isolated human self being what's really fundamental, the most fundamental thing, that we're a bunch of isolated selves. Now, in one way, of course, here's Mitch, he's embodied, I'm over here. Of course, we're separate in one way, but it misses all the ways in which we're actually not separate at all. We're connected. Think of a couple of those ways. None of us gives birth to themselves, for example, okay? So every one of us, our bodies depend on other people. And in fact, it's not just that they depend on other people. Our makeup, our genetic makeup and everything is all coming down to us from the past. All these histories embedded into us physically. That's just our physical bodies. Think about our thoughts. Think about how the degree to which what I'm thinking at any given point depends on the culture in which I'm existing in, the language that I'm thinking in, depends on how I was raised, the kind of educational background I have, the thoughts of others that I've read or haven't read. I mean, all of my thoughts, it's not like I'm over here just making up a language by myself. All of my thoughts are in response and in relationship to others. Also my feelings. I mean, a lot of our work at Arbinger is about how our emotional experience actually is bound up in how we're seeing other people. So our work really fundamentally, it really argues against, as many other philosophers have over the last couple of hundred years as well, this assumption of an isolated human self that is so embedded in our culture actually that we don't realize how central it is. And one of the places this shows up, a couple of them actually, it shows up very heavily, this assumption, in self-help areas. and many self-help books anyway that you would read, and also in leadership theory. And that's why we've added this chapter about this mistaken assumption, because it's so key, actually, to understanding how we're going to be together in any kind of organization, whether we're going to buy into this mistake that we are fundamentally separate, or whether we're going to understand really to our core that actually, no, we're fundamentally together. Mm-hmm. So let's think about, with that as a background, let's think about leadership for a moment. And I want to just together let's think about two teams. These teams could be in your organization. Just think of two teams. And I'll just represent them with these two groups of people. Now, both of these groups have someone who's sitting in the leadership seat, okay? But we'll just start with the groups, just these people. I'm gonna just add one element to this diagram, just one differentiating element. And let's consider then what difference this element makes. Here's the change. So to one group, we've put a box between the leader and everyone he or she leads, okay? Whereas in the other one, there's still someone in the leadership seat, and they understand that. They have leadership responsibility. But what they understand, the second leader, the one on the right, understands is, okay, I have the leadership title, but fundamentally we're together here. The fact that I'm the leader, that title, doesn't mean that I'm now inherently smarter, that I now have entitlements to certain things that other people don't have. We're all still in this project together. We're going to produce what we produce together. And so we call these two leaders in the book, we call them the isolated leader in the case of the person on the left, and the together leader in the case of the person on the right. And you can just consider your own experience. This, by the way, this applies not only to leadership. This can be the together teacher and the isolated teacher. On the other hand, this could be the together student and the isolated student.
Or the together parent.
Or the together parent or the isolated parent. That's exactly right. So again, the basic distinction is, do I understand that I'm fundamentally with people? Or have I bought in subtly, maybe from the org chart or from the title on my business card, have I bought into this sort of mythology that actually, no, there's something about me that's inherently different now. I'm the leader and they are all the led. And when I've bought into that, I bought into a mistake that creates all kinds of trouble and holds both myself and my team back and whole organizations back in ways that we're usually not aware of. And so with that bit of background, we dive into the book, into the core distinction that determines which kind of leader I'm going to be, or which kind of parent, or which kind of student, or which kind of teacher, or which kind of person for that matter. And that turns on whether we have one particular kind of mindset or another. Mitch?
That's great.
Why don't you take us?
And it's not just a leader. You might be watching this right now and saying, I wish I had a together leader that I could report to. Yeah. That would be fantastic. And I just don't. Well, it turns out I can be a together or isolated parent, leader, or team member.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I can, just with the person I'm working with day to day, I'm either isolated or together. I either take as my beginning assumption that who I am is just who I am, or that who I am is who I am with other people. And that determines both my experience as well as other people's experience, every step along the way. Well, you can see why at the core of this work is these two mindsets. Apart from anything that we might do on the surface and the things we might try to adjust if we were just thinking in terms of self-help that began with an assumption of an isolated self before anything else, once we understand that who I am is who I am with others, that I'm always together in every relationship, in every interaction, then I begin, first and foremost, with any change efforts, understanding that I'm always operating from one of two mindsets. I'm either operating from an inward mindset, which is a focus on myself, what I'm trying to accomplish, what I'm trying to become. And those might be well-intentioned things. I might be a really hard worker, for example. I might be a very charismatic leader, or I might be a really engaging follower. But to the one degree or another, when I'm inward, I'm only thinking about my own needs and objectives. I'm only thinking about who I'm trying to be. And I'm forgetting that I'm always in relation to other people, which is different than when I operate from an outward mindset. When I'm outward, the reality of other people is just a reality of my existence and a reality of who I am in every moment. Who I'm choosing to be in every moment is a function of how I choose to see and regard and respond to other people. And as if you've read the book, you notice there are certain things that play out in the case studies in that book, but there's also things that play out in your own experience. both when you've been with inward people or outward people, and when you've been inward or outward. When we find ourselves in an inward organization, one of the things that we found with our clients over the years is that there's just a blindness that exists in inward organizations because people don't see other people as mattering like they matter. And so they're blind to the needs and objectives of people around them. In fact, I'd say that that's one of the things that shows up the most is a lateral blindness.
Yes.
Oftentimes we have blindness toward our manager or our reports, but usually we're tied into what they're trying to accomplish because it's part of our job.
Yeah, right. Because even if we're self-interested, it's in our own self-interest to know what my boss wants from me. Right?
I've got to know what my boss wants in order to succeed and have them understand that I'm succeeding. But I don't
laterally,
know what you want.
right? Laterally, that's not
as
true.
my customer or my peer.
Yeah.
So blindness in an inward organization, but this awareness, this remarkable awareness that starts to begin to happen in an outward organization. It happens organically. We also find that in inward organizations, because there's that blindness, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, you don't know what I'm trying to accomplish, we operate in silos. And we could be going about our work in a well-intentioned and hardworking way, but we actually might be at cross purposes in the way we're going about our work.
And at least we're not helping where we could, right? Because we're just not aware of where we might be able to dive in and make a little change in what we're doing that would be helpful to you.
That awareness is at the core of our ability to collaborate, figure out how we're going to do this together. You'll find, too, that in an inward organization, there's just blame. Because if you're not real to me, if your needs and hopes and objectives don't matter to me, then it's easy for me to blame you as the reason why I can't accomplish my objectives. And that's all I'm really thinking about. I'm not thinking about, well, Jim's got to accomplish this and that, and surely he's worried about this. And if we're outward, though, and I'm thinking about Jim as a person who has needs and hopes and objectives that are as real to him as mine are to me, then I'm deeply accountable, not just for the things that I'm doing and executing, but what is this like for you? What does it mean for you when I'm working in this way?
Yeah, it's pretty easy for me if it's always Mitch's fault, right?
That is.
We don't get any better, but I feel better about myself in my inward way, and you don't want that.
In fact, it's interesting. The irony is that if I'm operating in an isolated self-assumption, that I don't see you as a person, and yet, as a person, you're the easiest thing for me to blame. You're my ready excuse, right?
That's true.
So I'm grateful for you, even though you're not a person, Jim. Of course, resistance in an inward organization, resistance to other people and their ideas, real innovation. We find that when people are outward and they're thinking about, okay, what's Jim's need? What's Joe's need? What's Barbara's need? Now, everything that I do is with other people inherently. So now I'm finding ways to do my work in a better and better way, to find ways for my customers to achieve what they're trying to achieve based on what we're producing. So innovation in an outward organization. Plus, it's just a way more fun way to work. And so morale and engagement improves dramatically in outward organizations. Well, that's at the core of our work. And again, as Jim was talking about, we operate from an inward mindset to the degree that we bought in any part to this fundamental mistaken assumption that undergirds a lot of leadership and organizational theory. Well, we've seen the impact of inward and outward mindset play out in really interesting ways in research that's been done since the publication of the first edition. I want to walk you through a few of those research projects here. One has been done by Ryan Gottfredson, one of our friends who's out of Cal State Fullerton, a really interesting research project that he's engaged in, where he's been looking at 4 different types of mindsets within people and organizations and tried to figure out what that means and how they show up. The first mindset that he looked at was the fixed and growth mindset. In a fixed mindset, I believe that who I am innately is just who I am. I can't improve in my abilities or capabilities or intelligence. Whereas if I have a growth mindset, all of those things can be improved upon. I can make a choice about those. He also looked at closed and open mindsets. If I'm closed to the ideas and suggestions of others, or I'm open to those, I'm eager to assimilate those into what I'm doing. He also looked at prevention and promotion mindsets, really focusing on individuals who are risk averse versus those that want to grow, they're willing to take risks, they're willing to help other people grow. And then lastly, an inward and outward mindset, Arbinger's distinction. Do I see other people as people, or do I see other people as objects? And the research study was done in a very interesting way. First of all, he had individual direct reports in an organization rate themselves on those 4 mindset scales through an instrument that he used. Then he had their leaders rate themselves on that same scale or on those 4 mindsets. And then he had the direct reports rate their leaders on those 4 mindsets. He got that data, and 4 weeks later then he administered another survey to understand the climate within each of those organizations. He found something very, very interesting as he went through the data. He found, first of all, that an individual direct report's self-assessment of their own mindset on any one of those 4 scales had no bearing on the climate of that organization. Just didn't matter how an individual rated themselves. He also found that the leader's assessment of herself or himself also didn't have any statistical bearing on the climate that existed in that organization. The only thing that was predictive of the climate that existed within the organization in which he measured mindset was the direct report's perception of their leader's mindset. And then he found in the climate survey, he measured a number of different things: the quality of leader feedback and the quantity of leader feedback, all based on the perception of the direct report. This is all from their perspective, the direct reports. Again, since that was the only thing that really mattered. The emotional engagement that existed in the climate of that organization. The turnover intention, whether people were thinking of leaving or not, the organization. Psychological safety, inclusiveness, and then individuals' trust in their manager. And what he found was that while all of the different mindset types had some bearing, that in every single one of these cases, these 7 different indicators of climate, that inward and outward had the highest predictive success of determining what the climate would be. The inward or outward mindset of the leader. To say that another way, a leader's view of their direct reports, as perceived by their reports, whether they saw their direct reports as people or objects, was the biggest predictor of the climate in that organization. We find that fascinating. We've also been doing some research with Cornell University and have found some really interesting results that we've termed, half jokingly, the mindset contagion effect. And we'll walk you through those. What you see here is on different indicators of climate, like in this survey that was done by Ryan, you see a baseline assessment around the climate that exists in an organization before any training around mindset was done, before they were equipped with tools to begin to think about an inward versus an outward mindset. So you see the baseline score. It's not surprising that leaders rated the organization higher than their direct reports. They felt like everything was just a little bit better.
Because they're leading it.
Because they're leading it, of course. Of course it's okay around here. But then something really interesting happened. Then you see that 2 sets of leaders were then trained after that baseline assessment. The second set of leaders started, before any training, higher in their assessment of the organizational climate than they did at the beginning. And that's just because the first set of leaders started to change in their mindset. But then what you notice in the brown, you have over here the employees, the direct reports assessment of the climate. And then when they started training over here in April, their assessment of the organizational climate began dramatically higher. And they hadn't been trained or exposed to any of these ideas. All they had been exposed to was a leader
Who's different.
Who starts to see
They're not isolated so much anymore. They're more of a together leader. They're showing up in all kinds of different ways. Yeah.
And then you notice too, once the people around them start to work with other employees who are outward, then that dramatically increases over time. So by the last training in October, those people, before they were introduced to the ideas at all, they started seeing the organization differently. And we saw that in areas of empowerment. We also saw that in psychological safety. You see that too in managerial support, where they began and where they started, where they began before any training, and then where they reassessed themselves prior to their introduction to this work. We also see that across the board in a number of different areas where we've been assessing the result. And of course, the results with the patients change as well. One of the most remarkable things to see in this study of this particular hospital was that their patient satisfaction increased dramatically, as well as the access to care, things that really matter, not just how we feel about each other, but also the results that we're getting together.
Okay, that's awesome. It's so fun to see that kind of change, isn't it? And the influence that people have on one another. Right? That just is further evidence of how we're fundamentally in relationship and in response to each other.
Yeah.
So I want to take you into now some additional research we've been conducting since the publication of the first edition. We call it the Mindset Assessment. In fact, I'm going to introduce two assessments that we now have that are all available for you to take. The first is the Mindset Assessment. Now we're not going to conduct a formal poll here together, but I want you to think in your minds, and then I'm going, in response to a couple of questions I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to show you what the research is showing about those questions. So the first question is, I just want you to imagine this. I just want you to think about your own organization, and if you were to rate it on a scale from 0 or 1 to 10, from inward mindset to outward mindset, where would you put your organization? Just think about that. 0 to 10, where would you put your organization? And give it a number. And then in your own mind, give yourself a number, okay? Same scale, from inward mindset, all the way inward mindset, a 0, all the way outward mindset, a 10. Where would you rate yourself? Now, most people can intuit, at least partly, what those results would be. One is this. What the research shows, this is now over thousands and thousands of people across industries and markets. Here's what the research shows. On average, people rate they rate their organizations at a 4.6 on this scale. Okay, 10 would be, fantastic, all the way outward mindset, somewhere between 4 and 5. And most people intuit, when they just hear the question, that everyone rates themselves higher, right? Which is what the research shows as well. It's true if you just ask people straight out, give us a number, they're going to rate themselves higher. But our instrument also reveals this. So on average, what the instrument reveals is that people rate themselves at 6.5. Now, that creates a challenge. And here's the challenge. So we have an organizational change initiative, let's say. And let's say I'm thinking on average, I'm a 6.5. Now, I'm not perfect, I've got room, but I'm looking around at Mitch and I'm thinking, he's a 4.6. Barbara's a 4.6, right? I mean, we have all these 4.6s around here, need to really get moving, need to make some changes. And of course, I'll chip in, when I see some real change happening in the people it needs to happen most. And the problem, of course, is Mitch is over there. He's thinking he's a 6.5 and I'm a 4.6 on average. And so what that tends toward in an organization, and just see if this isn't your experience, people wait on change. They wait on change by waiting for others to change because on average, in a dramatic way, we believe others need to change more than we ourselves do. And that tends then toward a static sort of state in an organization. And it's part of the frustration, I think, that people feel. It's part of the frustration that workers feel at all levels, leaders, all the way up to the executives and all the way to the people on the front line. So that's the challenge. Now, I think one of the things that's amazing, at least for me personally, about Arbinger's work is it wakes us up to that in a way where it's so easy to resist the suggestion I might have an inward mindset. If that possibility is delivered sort of in a non-helpful way, there's a way actually to move through these ideas and this information in a way that doesn't create that kind of resistance. I mean, it's part of what we've learned over decades, right? Is how to do that. So that people wake up to, oh my word, I guess I'm not quite as on top of things as I thought. I mean, I didn't even realize about this whole inward-outward thing. And oh man, I can see where I've got inward, and now I've got tools to make changes, and I want to make those changes. It'd be better for me, it'd be better for everyone else. So by overcoming that challenge, that means that equips individuals and organizations to take advantage of this massive opportunity. I mean, this massive opportunity. On average, let's say it's a 4.5 organization to move it to a 5, to a 6, to a 7, to an 8, because the move is being led by all of us together now, realizing that, hey, we're all a part of this. Yeah. This isn't a separate issue. This isn't an isolated issue. This is a together issue. And we're going to do this. We're going to make this change together. If I'm the leader, in fact, a lot of times, this happens more often, actually, than I wish were the case. But we'll be contacted by an organization, like, say, someone in a leadership role, and they'll love the idea of Arbinger's work. But fundamentally, they'll think, we need to get all our people going on
love this for everyone else, for all the idiots that work here.
Yeah, and just to help the leaders understand that, no, actually, it has to start with you. I mean, people have to actually see both the openness, the willingness, and the change. It's part of the stumbling block that has to be overcome to their own change. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that other people don't need to change.
No,
right?
That's right.
But when I'm just clear-headed about that, other people might need to change. But I begin to see too that maybe the reason why other people aren't changing is because they're in response to me, because we're together.
Exactly right.
So
in a way, we're reflecting each other,
Yeah.
in different sorts of degrees. That's right. So a change in me actually changes the entire situation. Well, okay. So you can take this assessment. It will reveal some interesting things for yourself and for your organization. If you go to our website at arbinger.com, you'll see there's a tab there to take the Arbinger Mindset Assessment. You'll also notice a new assessment there that's highlighted in that blue box there currently on the website. And it's a really interesting assessment, Mitch. It's the Mindset Styles Assessment. And what the Mindset Styles Assessment does is it gives you a whole bunch of really fascinating data. And I promise you will find this really interesting as you complete it, because you'll answer questions about a series of situations that you can find yourself in. And those situations across in different directions, like those sorts of situations toward my manager, for example, toward my coworkers, toward people who report to me if I have them, toward my partner, my life partner if I've got one, or toward children if I have them, or toward my neighbors. So you get this multi sort of situational look in multiple directions that then gives you a kind of a kaleidoscope of interesting things to think about. And here are a few. So it will illustrate in which situations you are more likely to show up with an inward mindset or with an outward mindset. It will also show you toward whom, in which sorts of relationships you're more likely to show up with an inward mindset or an outward mindset. I mean, I might be pretty outward in one direction, like toward my boss, for example, and pretty inward toward my peers, and that will be illustrated in very interesting ways in this assessment. And then also, it will show you, and I find this fascinating, it will show you when you have an inward mindset toward in a given direction or in a certain kind of situation, what style of an inward mindset you more often tend towards. So there are four sort of fundamental styles of inwardness that we talk about. One of them is a better than kind of inward mindset style, where I've elevated myself above other people, kind of looked down at them and their ideas and opinions. Another is an I deserve kind of inward mindset, where I sort of feel like I'm not getting what I deserve. I'm entitled to certain things. Another style is what we call a worse than inward style, where I've kind of separated myself, or I've isolated myself by feeling that I just don't measure up to other people. So other people kind of have to step up and do things. I just don't have the ability to do it for whatever reason, genetics or education or whatever self-worried reason I might have. And then a fourth style is a need to be seen as sort of style, where I might sort of have this worry I'm not as good as someone else or others in the organization, but I don't want others to think that about me. So I have this sort of frenetic, anxiety-ridden need to be seen as a certain kind of a person, as being really smart or really helpful or really funny or whatever. So this instrument will actually give you data, rich data, on in which directions, when you go inward, you'll tend to go in which kinds of styles, and in which situations you'll tend to show up in a better than way or a worse than way or an I deserve way. So I invite you, we both do, to go to arbinger.com, take that new assessment. We think you'll find a lot of information that will be rich and helpful.
It's so interesting because so often we fixate on this idea of personality, Jim. And there are assessments around personality that might be very, very helpful, but oftentimes the idea of personality can get in the way. But what this assessment shows is actually I show up with what people would call different personality traits, right? In different situations. I might have what we would call a different personality with my boss than with my own children, for example. But it's a function of my need to find justification in those different situations, not a function of who I innately am, which goes back to this very first point, right? That I'm not an isolated self that's predetermined. Who I am is always in relation.
In response and in relation, That's exactly
and I begin to see that through that assessment. Well, look, we want to dive in for a few minutes here about what you could do. There's these ideas, and they're powerful, and they have impact anywhere you put them to work. But what could you do right now? What kind of game plan could you put together? And so Jim and I want to just take a few minutes and suggest a few things out of the book that you could do. And the last chapter in the book we've added is a chapter around game planning. What can you do now? These are powerful ideas, but how do you put them to work both in your professional life and at home? So the first thing we'd like to talk about that everyone can do right now is to mobilize around a collective goal. This is something that is often missing from organizations. You can see it most clearly in a family. Oftentimes in a family, we just kind of exist together. We go week after week and month after month, and we're just kind of surviving if it looks like my house. But we don't have some collective goal that we're about. In an organization, if you're going to turn outward and accelerate an outward mindset change, you've got to have a collective goal that you're all invested in, that you've articulated and is clear. You can see why that matters in different organizations that we highlight in the book. One of them, Plum Healthcare, the organization that I was at before coming to Arbinger, articulated their collective goal this way. They said, our goal is to wonderfully enrich the lives of 1 million people every 10 years. That's really interesting. Now, if you think about a typical healthcare organization, the goal can seem pretty clear on its face. Well, we're trying to deliver a certain result to our patients. We want to provide a certain clinical result, make sure that they recover or get back to health, whatever that might be. But the way that Plum articulated that with their people was so powerful because it now is not just about a patient. It's that our experience and our result at the end of the day is a function of how we all are together.
And it made the work into a meaningful cause that we're part of, right?
A meaningful cause, inherently meaningful,
Yeah.
and it helped me think in every moment, no matter what my role is in the organization, from the CEO to a frontline nurse to a janitor to someone who's in the kitchen around the dietary needs of the patient, we're all thinking our job is to wonderfully enrich the lives of 10 million people, or 1 million people every 10 years. So now I'm thinking about growth differently. Well, how are we going to grow to impact that many people? Now I'm thinking about, yes, the patient matters, their family matters too. But in the same way that the patient and their family and the community members and the providers who are helping them, my coworkers matter.
Yeah, because if I'm making your job harder, we're not enriching other lives like we would otherwise be. And that's a failure. We're failing on the mission by the way I'm doing my own part of that mission.
You as my coworker, you're a life, right? So I
yeah,
can't
that
wonderfully
too, yes.
enrich. So as they thought about how many lives could we enrich every 10 years, as they started to think about coworker to coworker.
That counts too.
Yeah. Caregiver to patient and family and providers.
Yeah,
now
that's great.
we're all in this together. In fact, we had the same discovery here at Arbinger when we realized that more than anything else that we do, our work at its core, our collective result together, is to turn the world outward. And now, if I'm having a conversation with you, the question is your world being turned outward as a result of that conversation, or is this about me? Because sometimes we can get so focused on what we're providing as an organization that we lose the fact that what we are together and who we are together, it's going to drive that result. One of the most interesting case studies in the book that we highlight around figuring out and mobilizing people around a collective goal is in Kansas City, where they had done police work in a very traditional way in the west side of Kansas City for years, where there was lots of crime and challenges that we detail in the book. Instead of thinking about their result in terms of the kinds of things that you can quantify daily, like the number of tickets issued, having some quota around arrests, they thought, no, wait, our collective goal together, our result, is to create clean and safe places to live. Now it turns out that the police and the community are not on different sides of the table of that result. In fact, we can't get that result if we're not engaging all of those community members in helping us with that.
That's right.
So do we speak their language? Are we spending time building relationships so that they would come to us with crime? Are we engaging them in the projects that would clean up and make the neighborhood safer? You can think about it simply with the San Antonio Spurs. They've got what seems like a clear result. Well, we're trying to win basketball games and ultimately championships. But I can do that with an inward mindset.
I could try.
But they realize that I'm going to achieve that result more easily with an outward mindset. So their result became, we're going to try to create completely ego-free teamwork, because we know that that leads to the right result. We know that if we're focused on enriching lives, turning the world outward, making this community safe and clean, that we're going to get to the other results that matter. But we can't get there unless we're outward. It turns out that figuring out this collective result enables people to mobilize on their own. One of the challenges when I come in as a leader and say, okay, guys, here's the vision, here's what we're going to do, I'm now in the position where I've constantly got to be going around and making sure that I'm adjusting what everybody does to hit that result.
Yeah.
But if we come up with a collective result together that we're about, that's bigger than any one of our individual contributions, then I'm thinking about in the moment, what could I do differently? And you're thinking about what could you do differently? You think about the innovation that happens on the level of the work across an organization organically without any leader coming in and having to orchestrate that. It happens on its own. This is a really important piece of your own game plan because it turns out that you don't need anyone else in the organization. It'd be better probably if your organization articulated a clear collective goal together you could mobilize around, but each one of us can think about, okay, what is the collective goal that I'm about, that my work nests into?
And each team can do that. At the
Every
team
team can
level,
do that.
yeah, we can decide as a team, yeah.
And if you don't feel like you're in a position, go to your manager and say, hey, here's how I've been thinking about my work. It seems like what we're about is really this. Is that right? Could we articulate that with everybody? Because I want to make sure that my work is nesting into that goal and helping everyone around that goal. So don't wait for anyone else. Again, as Jim said, oftentimes the thing that we're waiting for most is for other people to change. Just find the collective result that you're a part of, dive in, and start to think about your work in terms of what other people are
So
trying to achieve.
empowering. Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you, Mitch, for that. I want to share with you a few ideas about accountability that follow from this work as well. We find there are a couple core misunderstandings also about accountability. One is, as we work with leaders across the world, I'd say, at least I'll check this with you, Mitch. What I hear most from leaders when they're just wishing for changes in their leaders that report to them, they wish most that their leaders were better at holding their people accountable. They express that all the time. And that's such a misunderstanding because if leaders have to hold everyone else accountable, it means there isn't accountability. And so what you really want is you want to learn how to help people hold themselves accountable. You want to develop self-accountable people. That's number one. And that's partly, of course, at the core of what our work's about. Number two, even around what accountability means, in our experience, there is a misunderstanding. It actually doesn't go far enough. And in order to show how it doesn't go far enough, I want to introduce you to what we call the 3 levels of accountability. I'm going to do that quickly with a few personal stories, actually. So this one here, you'll see it's a rental car bus. Here, this is a year or two ago. I was flying into Philadelphia, it turns out, and you come out of the terminal, and a lot of times you're waiting for these buses for a while. Well, it just so happened, Mitch, this time I came out the door of the terminal, and literally I'm striding out the door, and the rental car bus is pulling up in the exact moment. It's just gliding to a stop. I'm walking up to it. The door is open, and I just, it's got the 2 doors on. I just right on it. I thought, this is fantastic. This is setting up to be a good trip. I sit down. I've got my luggage right there, and I look, and I notice there's a big, long line of people waiting to get on that bus through the front door. So now I'm feeling a little bit sheepish, head down, kind of not looking people in the eye when they're loading on. And it turns out there are so many people that they're not all going to fit on this bus. And some people are traveling together. I mean, parents and kids are now separated, and there's starting to be altercations in this bus about you got to let them on. And I think it was the end of a long day for the driver, and he was getting animated, and it was kind of heated, and I'm just shrinking over there the whole time because I've added to this bit, and I'm sure they were thinking about this guy who just ran on with no consideration for anyone else. Well, finally the driver relented. We mashed everyone into the bus. So it's all just sardines in there. I'm all scrunched. I think my luggage is still taking up other people's space. We're all scrunched. And we go off to the rental car center. And the one thing I know at that point, I could just feel it. I just know the right thing to do is when we get to the rental car center, I should just stay seated and let everyone else get off the bus. Right? I mean, that would be the right thing to do, right? So I know that, I get it, and I'm committed to that. So we pull up to this rental car center. Bus stops, doors open. It's so congested though, and there's people here, and their luggage is over here and over there. There's kind of jostling, and people aren't really leaving. I mean, we're all still stuck on this bus. And in this moment, there's like a little bit of daylight that opens. Right here, people are separating, probably getting to their luggage. I'm just sitting there, kind of separating. I see the door, and I just go for it. I'm first or second off that bus. Now, when you think of that story, you can think about what was likely going through my mind. I'd think to myself, well, look, I mean, these people, they're slow. They obviously aren't in a hurry to get anywhere. I've got important things to do, and now they start tomorrow. But
Not
I mean,
much luggage.
Not much luggage. I did right. I'm not creating trouble. And by the way, I'm helping the situation by disembarking. That's one fewer people.
Sure.
A person. So now other people. It creates more space. So I've got all these justifications.
You're good at this,
going.
Jim.
Yes, I am. A lot of practice. So that kind of experience, and you can just imagine, just think for yourself. Because we all, I mean, if you're like me, you'll have plenty of experiences as well where you'll have all kinds of reasons, what we call at Arbinger justifications, for why you're doing what you're currently doing. Mm-hmm. And to one degree or another, those justifications involve very often blame of other people. And what that has to do with accountability is that blame and accountability are inversely related. Mm-hmm. The more I'm blaming what I'm doing on others or on the circumstances around me, the less accountable I am. And I've disempowered myself to do anything about it either, right? I mean, because the responsibility lies elsewhere. So that's what we call level 1 accountability, which of course is no accountability at all. I'm blaming my actions or my poor performance on other people or on circumstances, the economy or the company or whatever. So that's level 1. Here's another example. We'll introduce us to level 2. So years ago, I was a lawyer at a big corporate law firm. And I was young lawyer at the time, probably a second-year lawyer. And I'm involved in this big international project. It happens to be a funding project with about 30 banks around the world of a very large power plant in Indonesia. And our law firm had, we were responsible for the main lending contract. And the main lending contract had a whole bunch of exhibits attached, a whole bunch of addenda to that contract. And my job on this deal was all of those. Mm-hmm. And there were about 8 to 10 of us on our law firm on the deal from offices around the world. And I got a call from our partner one day. This was about 2 weeks after our first child was born. It's in the month of December. And he says, we're having an all-hands meeting in New York, and we need you there. We're all coming in. And I said, well, how long will we be there? And he says, don't know. It could be 2 weeks. It could be 2 months. We're there till the deal closes. And I'm like, we just had a baby. Now, I didn't quite say that to him that way, but inside I'm going, we just had our first child, and it's the holidays, and are you kidding me? And so I kind of reluctantly got my stuff together, got on a plane, and get to New York finally. Now, I'm the last guy in on the deal. The guy from our Hong Kong office beat me. I'm the last guy in. And I get in there's no more offices on the main floor of the building where all the people are located, where the whole epicenter of the deal is. So I'm 3 floors below, and I bring my pictures of my young newborn child, and I'm setting them up all over the desk, and I bring all those documents that I'm working on. I got them all, and I start working around the clock, Mitch, and it was around the clock. I went down, I'd grab breakfast in the lobby of the building, I'd grab lunch in the lobby of the building, I'd grab dinner in the lobby of the building while I'm working on my documents. And then 4 days into this, or 5, I discover that they're actually serving meals in the main conference room for everyone on this deal 3 floors above me. And I was upset that no one had told me about that. And a whole bunch of things happened where I realized that, wait a second, I was so buried on my little parts of the deal, which, by the way, depended on everyone else's parts of the deal. Talk about an isolated lawyer versus a together lawyer. I mean, a together lawyer here, if I'm working on my documents, I need to know all the changes in the deal. Mm-hmm. So I can make adjustments. The isolated lawyer, I've got my job to do. I'll work over my little documents, okay? And I thought I was working so hard. I was. But I was working in an isolated way. And I was working at what we call a level 2 way of accountability, which is a level of accountability that a lot of people aspire to, but it actually is, it's nowhere near where we need to get. And that level is that, I was holding myself accountable for my own actions and performance, but my actions and performance were affecting a lot of other people and their ability to perform, and I wasn't holding myself accountable at all for that. Now, this is a level of accountability that is level 2 that I can have if my mindset's inward. I can focus on my own narrow piece, and I can make sure I do it really well, and I can work really hard, okay? But what you were talking about earlier, Mitch, this lack of awareness or interest generally in the impact I'm having on the people around me, which I only overcome that blindness as I turn outward. Mm-hmm. That is not available. That level of accountability is not available to me while I remain inward, right? So that's level 2. Now I want to give you now a level 3 example, also from my experience as a lawyer. And this was my very first supervisor. She was an amazing lawyer. She was a 4th year going on 5th year attorney, which at a big law firm environment is a really critical time. You can't afford any mistakes because you're being considered for partnership. And this is literally my very first project on the deal. It was for a company, a client that everyone in the world knows this company. It's one of the great brands in the company. It's a beloved brand, and they were wanting to expand their operations. And in order to do that, they had to be able to take over. And this is kind of crazy. Take over some mobile home parks in the state of California, and they needed somebody to become expert on California mobile home law to see how they could go about doing that. And that's the kind of project you get as a first-year lawyer at a very large law firm. Hey, why don't you go become expert on mobile home law? Okay, so that was my first project.
Prestigious.
It is very prestigious. And so I threw myself into it with all that I had. And I went and I researched in the law library. I pulled out all the books and all the statutes and the case law, and I tore this thing to pieces to figure it out, and I figured it out. And I wrote this memo. It took me about a week to figure this all out and write this memo, and where I just laid it out. Here is the law. Here's what our client can do. Here's what our client must not do. I gave it to my supervisor, and she, I'll call her Anita. And Anita, she got that. She was super happy. We called the head partner on the deal, who brought in this client. I'll call him Ralph. Ralph was thrilled. So we call the VP and general counsel of this big mega company in the world. He's thrilled. And I feel like I'm a star. I mean, I'm a week into this, and I've just nailed it. Well, we're about 3 days later, and I'm talking with Anita. And Anita says to me, hey, Jim, I've been meaning to ask you, when you were doing that legal research about the mobile home law, did you happen to check the pocket parts in the research books? Now, what that means, at least what it meant at the time, now everything's gone digital, but what it meant at the time, a pocket part, see, in the law is always changing. You have statutes at all levels, I mean, state, local, federal, municipal level. Things are being passed all the time. You have new cases being decided, and you have these big picture a law library with really thick books. You can't reprint those books every month to reflect the changes. So they had a pocket in the back where whatever's changed over this last month gets slipped into that. It's printed, that alone's printed and slipped in. And it was very basic back then at law school. Don't forget to check the pocket parts, okay? Basic. Well, so Anita asked me that, and all of a sudden I realized, oh my word, I didn't check the pocket parts. Now, that was really embarrassing, because it's basic. But I thought, okay. I mean, it's embarrassing, but okay. I mean, how bad can it be, really? What are the chances that California mobile home law has changed? I mean, really. So we walk up to the library, and we start pulling these books. And we start looking at the pocket parts, and lo and behold, over the last 6 weeks, the whole California mobile home law regime has been completely overhauled. Completely overhauled. And we didn't have time at that moment, but as I was pulling through and looking through, I'm like, oh no, this could be really bad. I mean, it looked like I was having the client run over a cliff. So we go down to Anita's office. And whereas 3 days earlier, I thought, I'm a star. Now I'm thinking, that was a pretty good 10-day career. At that point, I got to figure out what I'm going to do next. So she calls up Ralph, the head partner on the deal. And he's in our LA office, and she says this to Ralph. She says, Ralph, you remember that mobile home law research? He said, yeah. She said, I made a mistake on that. It turns out the law's just recently been changed. We're not to the bottom of it yet, but by the end of day today, we're going to be back to you with what changes. It looks like we're going to have to stop the client from doing some things. And Ralph's very sort of animated. His language gets really colorful. I started to hear him get really heated on the phone, and he yells at her to go call the client to give the news. So she calls the client. I'm sitting there the whole time. She calls the VP and general counsel of the client. Same thing. Mike, remember that California mobile home law research? I made a mistake on that. And by the end of the day today, we'll be back to you with what exactly it's going to mean. There's been a recent change, but for now, just put everything on hold. And Mike was a little less animated than Ralph, and he says, okay, get back to me by end of day today. Well, she hangs up, and I said to her, Anita, Anita's not a real name, by the way, but I said, Anita, what do you mean you made a mistake? I mean, I'm the one who made the mistake. And she said to me, yeah, you did, Jim. But she said, but you know that. She said, but I made a mistake too. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I'm your first supervisor. And ever since I gave you this assignment, I a number of times I thought to myself, remind Jim, make sure that he checks the pocket parts. And had I just followed through on that as your first supervisor, then none of this would have happened. So you made a mistake, but I did too. Now, I'll tell you, from that moment, if you stack the mistakes next to each other, I mean, okay, fair enough, she made a mistake. I put it like down here. Mine's this massive, mountain of a mistake. But the relative difference did not keep Anita from stepping up and taking responsibility for that. And she really demonstrated what we call level 3 accountability, which is, Anita held herself accountable for her own actions and performance and for her impact on others. That is my actions and performance. If she'd really stepped up the way she was thinking of this, she should be doing as my supervisor, I wouldn't have made that mistake. And she was holding herself accountable to that level. And that is a level of accountability that's only accessible by someone with an outward mindset. And that's the kind of accountability that if you build that in organizations, it completely transforms them because it takes care of blame, right? I mean, and I'll tell you, from that moment, I would have done anything for her. And from that moment, every possible chance I had to work with her on a deal, I took it. And I'd work 24/7 and no excuses because of who she was, because she showed up in a level 3 way with this incredible outward mindset toward me, holding herself accountable. It just awakened in me this deepened level of accountability myself, which again goes back to this together point. I mean, her influence on me, it's reciprocated back and forth, and around we go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love those stories. You can imagine if Anita had done something different, right? The thing that we might expect her to do in order to cover herself.
Of course, so much was at stake for her. Yeah,
but it reveals, if you contrast what Anita did and what she could have done, neither of those are isolated, right? If she considers herself isolated, it's still not the truth.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
She's always together. You're always
and
together.
then I would have started blaming her likely if I felt like she'd thrown me under the bus, then I would have been less likely to stand up and hold myself accountable. It's exactly right. Yeah, so just in summary on these 3 levels, so you have level 1 accountability is I blame my actions or poor performance on others or on circumstances. Level 2 is that I hold myself accountable for my actions and performance. And level 3, which is what you really want, which you can only get to with an outward mindset, is I hold myself accountable for my own actions and performance, yes, but also for my impact on others' actions and performance.
Awesome. Awesome, Jim. Well, look, we've got a few minutes left, and we want to take some of the questions. If you've sent them in, we'll see if there's any that pop up here. Thanks for sending them in. Thanks for asking the questions. And if we have a few minutes, we'll try to answer some of those if they're coming in. It looks like we have one coming in now. As we wait for this one to come in, just remember that the assessments that we've identified today, you can go take today. We'd invite you to go take the Arbinger assessments on the Arbinger website, the assessment of yourself and the organization, what we call the mindset assessment, as well as the inward mindset styles assessment. You can also go take the assessment that's on ryangodfredson.com. That's GOTTFREDSON, to see where you rank across those 4 different mindsets.
Here's a question, Mitch. Let's take on. So, is there any time when an inward inward focus is a good thing?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah. Is it possible to be both outwards and inwards toward people? Well, let's take on the first one. Is there any time when an inward focus is a good thing? Words sometimes are tricky. And we tried to make a distinction in the book because of some questions that came in while we were passing out the original manuscript about introspection. Because sometimes people got confused with, wait, isn't it good to be inward? Isn't it good to be self-reflective, to be introspective, to be self-evaluating? Well, sure, that's a good thing. But it turns out that sometimes that can even get in our way. The degree to which any self-improvement project is about me, it keeps me focused on the very thing that I'm usually trying to overcome, which is a focus on myself. So is it helpful to be introspective? For sure. Is it helpful sometimes to put my head down and get my work done? Only to the degree that, as your stories pointed out, that I remember that I'm on one floor of a many-floored building.
Right, and I'm affecting others and how I get my work done.
I'm affecting everybody.
Yeah.
So sometimes people might need me
Yeah.
to stop talking and go work.
Yeah.
But that's a behavioral distinction. It's not a mindset distinction. Because
Right.
when I'm outward, when I'm truly understanding that everything I do has an impact on others, I'm modulating what I do to be most effective.
Yeah.
So I don't think in any case we would call an inward mindset a good thing. But introspection, sure.
Yeah.
And focus on my work, sure.
Yeah. So that's right. So you might think of, as Mitch was just saying, about how when our mindsets are outward, it allows us to see, we become more aware. Really, this question, another way to word the question, is there any time when an inward focus is a good thing? Another way to ask that same question is there ever a time when not really seeing what's real is a good thing? When having less than, all the truth that's available to me to see would be helpful? And if you think about it that way, in my experience, at least in my own life, that doesn't really help. That it's actually, I'm able to make better decisions when I actually can see what's real. And that's what an outward mindset allows me to do. So the question really for each of us is, do I want to see what's real or do I not? Do I want to see what's sort of this phantasm in my own mind that might justify me, but it isn't actual? There's nothing to fear in seeing what's real. And then when we see what's real, then we can make distinctions. And to your point, Mitch, this is a mindset distinction. It's not a behavioral one. I mean, we're not talking about an extrovert versus an introvert, for example. I mean, an extrovert doesn't mean outward mindset. I mean, when I'm acting in an extroverted way, very often I'm thinking about myself. I'm performing. I can be acting what might look like an introverted way, but I'm thinking, sure, I'm introspecting, but I'm introspecting about how I am in relationship with others as well. And that's this deeper distinction we're making here.
I hear this question all the time in client organizations. Wait, you don't understand, Mitch. In order to even survive here, I've got to be inward. And as you said, the distinction is not a behavioral mindset distinction that they're making. What they're assuming is that having a particular mindset means that I'm showing up behaviorally in a certain way.
Yeah.
That what they're really saying is, I've got to be tough, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is that I can be clear-headed, I can be straightforward, I can be hardworking in either of two mindsets.
Sure.
But tough. Sure, and tough.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, I would imagine that Anita did something really tough in that moment, and if she's doing something tough in that moment, she's probably a very tough lawyer, right?
And she didn't let me off the hook by what she did.
No.
She allowed me to put myself squarely on the hook. There was nothing for me to blame at that point.
She was not your excuse.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
You had to take what you did and
right.
be fully accountable.
This next question, is it possible to be outwards and inwards towards people? And I would say, of course, right? Yeah. I mean, in fact, even toward the same, I mean, I could be inward toward Mitch one moment and outward toward, I could see him as a person, 10 minutes from now, and we go in and out of this multiple times a day in different directions. In fact, that's one of the things that's really interesting about this new Mindset Styles assessment. It actually shows that we show up in both inward ways and outward ways towards different people in different situations, even in the same moment.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And this last one, how do you influence high-level leaders with a new concept given all of their various focuses? And in organizations where change comes from the top, how can someone make change from the bottom that will meaningfully impact the organization? Jim, thoughts?
Well, look, that's a reality, right? I mean, part of seeing leaders, say the executives in an organization as people, is to realize they've got a lot of things they've got to handle. And maybe now's not the time to put a particular demand. That's a possibility. So in a case, if I find myself like that, then still the question then is, okay, then what can I do? What can we do as a team or as a division? What can we do? Because it's not going to make me worse off individually to be able to see better than I've been seeing and to be able to then work more effectively. It's not going to make my team worse off be able to see better so that we can show up more helpfully and really nail our work more. It's not going to make the division worse off. So wherever I'm situated in the organization, I mean, the first thing I can do, I might want to go evangelize to the boss or the leader and say, you let's do this. Okay, but a lot of times people don't respond well to that. I can dig in and start working with an outward mindset myself, and that spreads. In fact, we see that over. Yes, it's the best chance. We see that over and over and over again. All of a sudden, pockets of the organizations. What's going on over there? That really gets leaders' attention. Talk doesn't get a lot of attention. They've heard a lot of talk, but show me real results, and then I want to dive in beneath those results because I'd love to see those results all over the place. So that's where I would start. And then when you have the trust of the leader, then there's going to be a time and place where you can actually sit down and have that conversation, right? Part of the trust is actually being a good performer, right? That they know that they're going to listen to what you have to say. Yeah.
You know, it really begins with a belief that being outward in every moment, regardless of how other people's mindsets are in every moment, is the best way to get the result that other people need and deserve from me.
Right.
And if I believe that in my core, then I can go to work. And as you said, that's the best chance that other people will question, hey, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
Maybe we need to pay attention to a different way of working.
Yeah.
It's been such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you'll order the new edition.
It's available tomorrow.
But if
you go to
can pre-order
Amazon,
it today.
even today, you can pre-order it. Yeah. It's been great to be with you. Yeah, thank you very much. And we hope you love the book. Even if you've read the book already, we hope you love the new chapters in the book.
Yes.
Okay?
You can also go on our website and find a new updated study guide as well as a new micro course. That's a way to introduce the ideas to others or deepen your understanding of the book. Thank you so much. Have a great day.